Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone, and welcome back to the Vonc Podcast. I'm here today with a very esteemed guest, Dr. Wajid Akhtar, who is the newly elected Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. Dr. Wajid, how are you doing today?
Assalamualaikum, I'm doing fine.
Yep, doing fine. And I imagine it's been a busy few weeks for yourself. How have things been going?
Yeah. Intense is an understatement. It's going okay. Challenges along the road, which we expected, some which we didn't. But yeah, I think now I understand why everyone told me not to do it.
I mean, we've known each other a little while, and I would always joke that if there was one person I had to put in charge of British Muslims in the UK, it would be Dr. Wajid. I don't think I've ever told you.
Have I ever told you have terrible judgment?
And I do feel like a lot of other people feel the way because it seems like you've got quite an interesting thing going on with the MCB. Now, for many people and young people like myself, most of us may have not even heard of the Muslim Council of Britain, and those of us who have probably haven't got much faith in it as an organization that can lead us forward. Yet you've, for some reason, decided to dedicate the next few years of your life and maybe beyond to reviving and revitalizing it. So can I ask you what drove you to make that decision, and what do you see as the future for the MCB?
And so I'm going to separate two things out. There's one thing about my personal leadership, which in the grand scheme of things is not relevant, but why I'm involved, why I feel like the MCB is a place for myself and for anyone watching this podcast, is because of one word: unity. There has to be a place, a space, an organization where the Muslim community of this country is united. And if you have to look around, the organization that acts as the most cross-cultural, cross-sectarian, cross-country uniting body, the one that has the most robust governance, and the one that's been the most loyal to the Muslim community is the MCB, for better or for worse. There have been many pretenders that have come, but they've lacked either legitimacy, or they've been too willing to make a deal with the government at the expense of the Muslim community, or they've either come from one specific angle, maybe one ethnicity or one part of the country, and the MCB's managed to avoid all those pitfalls. So actually, when you look around, there's nothing like it in almost any other non-Muslim country. America, Canada, France, Germany, they do not have a body like the Muslim Council of Britain. In theory, this organization is where we can unite. The fact that we haven't done so yet is as much a problem of the MCB as it is of us.
And you mentioned that previous MCB administrations were focused on government engagement, perhaps a little bit too much. And for the context of viewers who might not be familiar with the MCB, I think traditionally their role has been to represent Muslims when it comes to speaking with the government. That was the number one function. Now we've obviously seen a policy of disengagement from the government. Labour and the Conservatives have really been attacking the MCB. So in light of a post-government era, what is the role of the MCB when it comes to Muslims? Is government engagement a priority? Is it something you're going to fight for? Or is there a different philosophy?
If we want to engage with the government, it's very simple. All I have to do is send an email to Downing Street and say, we give up. We're going to do everything you tell us to. You win, we lose. You tell us to jump and we'll ask how high. So if the policy is that we must engage at all costs, even at the cost of our dignity, even at the cost of our own self-interest, even at the cost of our faith, then it's easy. But that cannot be our policy. That cannot be the way we go forward. We have to have a policy where we say we will engage, but we have to have dignity. If we're going to sit at the table, it's not as a slave or a servant. It's not necessarily equal partners, because you can't be an equal partner with the government, of course, but as people with your own self-dignity, with your own backing, so that when you say no, it's actually appreciated and listened to, even if it's disagreed with. So the policy is, instead of just going straight to the top and saying, please speak to us, please speak to us, please speak to us, we're going to start with our community and grassroots first. We're going to engage with our grassroots. We're going to build loyalty and foundational expertise, growing up from the local community, reaching out to local NHS, local police, fire services, and so on, then going up to regional level. And finally, the government is the last piece of the puzzle, not the first. If it's the last piece of the puzzle, then we've got grassroots support, we've got infrastructure, and we've got resources in depth. We've got heft when we sit at that table. If it's at the first piece of the puzzle, we've got none of those.
And you mentioned that the MCB kind of has to gain the trust and the support and the love of the Muslim community in order for us, or any organization would really, if they want to speak to the government, or if they are to engage with the government, they need the trust of the Muslim community. Potentially, what are you representing?
Well, you'd say that, but that's not the case, because there's a lot of people who speak to the government in personal capacities. Maybe they're rich businessmen, maybe they're politically, savvy, or they're politicians themselves. So they're always speaking to the government. And sometimes, I think it comes from a good place. They want to help. They see a gap. There's a vacuum. They want to help. They want to represent the community. But all I would say to them and to everyone else, it cannot be right for the Muslim community to be represented by unaccountable, unelected, and unknown individuals, right? It just can't be. That is the definition of an oligarchy, right? That is the definition of handing over power to the elite, who can do whatever they want. They can make whatever backdoor deals, and we have to be docile and just listen to them? Who, like the age of the Nawabs and stuff like that ended with the East India Company. We don't want to bring that back. So all I'm trying to say is, if you have good intentions and you have access, that's great. But instead of using that access to speak to the government on everyone's behalf when nobody asks you to, and you haven't got a clue what everyone wants, even though you may think that you know better, what you should do is push for the government to speak to the representatives. And I'm not saying that's a grandiose way of saying you need to speak to the MCB, but whoever the legitimate representatives of the Muslim community are, that's who you speak to. Rather than say, listen, speak to me, those guys are idiots, I know exactly what to say, I'll explain it to you in the Queen's English, I went to Oxford, I went to Cambridge, and all of that kind of nonsense, which is exactly what happens a lot these days.
So you think it's a case that some of these people, many of them who I'm sure are doing great things and great advocacy, that it could be the case that some of these people who get into these higher rooms are often saying, hey, listen, the Muslim community don't know what they're talking about. If you talk to me, I'll give you a better opinion, insight.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's the Muslim community don't know what they're talking about, but I know what's best for them. Right? It's something that my eyes have really opened to in the last 6 months. There is a real disconnect. So you've got a grassroots group of the Muslim community who are working, in the mosques, doing community projects, community activists, organizers of all different styles and types, right? You've got from different communities, Somali community, Arab community, Asian community, and they're working away and they're plugging away at the grassroots. And they may not have a 5-year strategy, and they may not have a theory of change, and they may not have a vision and mission statement, but they're doing the work. And then there's another group, which over the last 20, 30 years have developed. They've gone into universities, higher education. Some of them are professors or they're connected to professors, and they're the intellectual elite. And they're all about they've reacted to this, and they're like, we need to have a theory change. Forget all this nonsense. We need to come up with a theory, and we need to be in the elite intellectual circles, and we need to be sitting with Professor so-and-so, and you need to be speaking to Lord so-and-so, and make those connections. That's true as well, but they're completely disconnected from the grassroots. They don't know the grassroots, and the grassroots don't know them. And if we don't bridge that divide, then what we're going to have is an intellectual elite, and you see this in some Muslim countries, right? An intellectual elite who align themselves with power and constantly cursing the stupid masses. They're just so dumb, they don't know what to do, and they're so incompetent, etc. And then you have the majority masses who are constantly looking at those guys and saying, you're so unrepresentative, you're sellouts, you don't represent us. And we're in real danger of this happening.
It's fascinating what you've said, because recently I spoke to a parliamentary staffer, and they explained to me that they're new to Parliament, and they said, I didn't realize this coming in, but Westminster is just this tiny bubble in the UK of a few hundred people that have disproportionate power over this country and this world. And I think this is probably the argument that many of the quote unquote elitists might use to say that actually unity isn't that important. Unity is a fluff word. It doesn't really matter if the grassroots feed into the higher engagements that people are having in the corridors of power. You talk about unity a lot, and it's a big part of your vision for the new MCB. Could you explain, what do you actually mean? What does it mean to bridge the divide between communities and between sections of the community? And what kind of change could we hope to actually see?
This is my element. If there's one word, look, even religiously, right? If you pray Maghrib prayer on your own, versus if you went to the mosque, you get 27 times more reward in the mosque. Have you prayed 4 rakahs in the mosque? Have you read Surah Baqarah in the mosque? What's different? The only difference is that you're surrounded by people, right? You're doing it together. There's a bonus, there's a barakah, there's a blessing in the collective, because the collective can make the impossible possible, whereas working alone, sometimes even the possible becomes impossible, right? So it's almost like the people who say, oh, we don't need unity, they're almost trying to shock you. But it's so idiotic, it's so stupid, it's so infantile to say that at any level. Like, no politician would say, I don't want unity. Because, like, the more people they have united around them, they're going to be more powerful, right? Every country wants people to unite. Every organization wants their team together. So unity is just a force of nature, and arguing against unity is like saying, I don't want gravity. Yeah, you might as well just say that. Unity is what gives a group power. Now, it's not the only thing, but everything spins off from that. If you have financial resources, but you don't have unity, then you're going to end up you're wasting it. If you have intellectual resources, you could have a Nobel Prize winner strategist in the Muslim community, but if the community is not united, what are you going to do with it?
What are the actions that the MCB could be taking, and what are the actions that the listener at home could be taking to actually, move us forward, to move away from being an armchair critic or an ivory tower theoretician? What do we do?
For me, it's 3 words: unite, empower, serve. Come together. Because we don't need any more Lone Rangers. We've got way too many Lone Rangers out there, all working really hard and failing miserably in their individual capacity, or succeeding as an individual, but the rest of us don't know. I'll give you an example that I spoke to some of my friends, very capable people, much more capable than I have, and they have more skills and more talent than I have. And I reminded them of projects that they did, and they'd forgotten they existed. I mean, you can see how long-lasting they were, because even the person who did it forgot that they did those projects, right? So unite, work together. And that sounds easy, but actually it's very hard, because there's a saying, a scholar once said, he goes, if you want a reminder, then the graveyard is sufficient. If you want an enemy, your nafs is sufficient. It's so difficult to work with other people, especially when you don't get along with them, when you don't like their personality, when you have a different madhab. It's really, really tough. And that's the thing that a lot of us run away from, to do these separate things. Empower means find a problem, a place, a section, an area that the Muslim community is struggling with, and fill that gap, right? Are we politically empowered? No. So let's fill that gap. Are we financially empowered? No. Let's fill that gap. Is there a national zakat plan? No. So NZF is filling that gap. Find something and fill that gap, right? And be the organization, be the people that are filling gaps in the community, because this is how we build up gradually over time. And then finally, serve. If you are not serving your community, if you're not serving, it doesn't have to be necessarily the grassroots. You can, by coming up with a strategy, right? For example, working on a national revert strategy, so that if anyone reverts wherever they are able to have a pathway that they follow, and they're paired up with an older revert, so that their journey is a little bit smoother into Islam. That's great, because that's a practical use of your strategic thinking. So unite, empower, serve, get involved. That's what I say. This is, for God's sake, it's like the World Cup final, and you think you're someone in the stand, in the nosebleed section, right? Whereas actually you're a player on the pitch. Get onto the pitch, because we're 10 men down and we need you to play, right? We don't need anyone staying in the stand. Just get onto the pitch now, because we could win this thing.
I mean, you said something powerful, and you've talked about the fact that we have loads of successful Lone Rangers. And often when we talk to Muslims every day, people in our community, about a specific sector, for example, you could talk about the film sector, someone would bring up Riz Ahmed. You could talk about culture and someone would bring up someone else. You could talk about politics and they'd bring up Sadiq Khan. Yet we don't seem to have synergy between the sectors, and within the sectors, we don't seem to have synergy between different pillars of society, between business and charity. You don't have unity. And I think people don't understand that, or maybe we could help explore just the fact that organizations that are doing one thing alone, and when you add them to another organization that does another thing alone, it doesn't add up to 2. It adds up to 5, 11, whatever.
Unity, it's the unity bonus. It's the unity barakah, right? Mm-hmm. It's the working together. I know unity gets a bad name because it's been overused. It doesn't make it bad. There's that saying, you don't hate history, you hate the way it was taught to you. You don't hate unity, you just hate the way that it's been presented to you so far. You hate the way that people have done it so far. They've said unity, but actually they meant uniformity. And so don't hate the game, hate the player, right? The way that people played Unity so far maybe has been unacceptable, but that doesn't mean that we give up on Unity.
So many people would say the MCB isn't well financially resourced, and that could be a significant problem. They could say you guys are talking a big game about bringing organizations together, but supporting them as well. One thing I would say, though, having seen the caliber of people that are joining the new MCB team as volunteers and potentially as staff, it seems like there's a bit of an Avengers coming together right now.
It will
Yeah.
happen. Once the bandwagon is made and once things start, the buzz
Yeah.
starts happening, then everyone wants to join. It's the people who are joining before that happens, right? That they are going to be, the original Avengers, like all these other random Avengers who come and, be part, I don't know.
Phase 4 and who's what.
Yeah, exactly. Like nobody cares about them, right? But the original group is always going to be the one. So you could be on the original group, but you just have to believe in something before it's happened. That's all.
And for it seems to be a mix of people who have long experience in community activism. But for those people who haven't dipped their toe into community service or community work, those people who are focused on building a business and serving their family or advancing in their career, and 99% of the time with the intention of doing good, with the intention of donating to a charity, with the intention of raising good kids that can go and be influential. What is in it for them to be part of the MCB? Is there a higher calling there?
Absolutely. Look, do the rest of us not have kids? Do the rest of us not have like a job? Are we all kind of just sitting here like, you flip your script, start thinking rather than, I need to look after my family, I need to look after my job, which you do. No one's telling you to abandon anyone. But when you go from this world, your children are not going to be like, oh, my dad, he earned 100K a year. My dad, he had this many degrees. They will not give a damn. What they'll remember you for is what you did outside of your work. That's what they'll remember. That's what they're going to be proud of you for. So this is your life's work. Your real life isn't what you live between 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It's what you live between 5 p.m. and 9 a.m. That's your real life. This is your legacy. And it's a different world. I cannot explain it in any more detail than saying that, it seems like such a limited life to just exist for yourself and your immediate loved ones. There's a whole ummah out there that's looking for you to help them. And you have every chance to be Batman, but you choose to be Bruce Wayne. Not even Bruce Wayne, you choose to be an extra walking on the street next to Bruce Wayne. Why would you do that? You have every chance to be someone who changes their life, who revolutionizes the way your community is seen, who is a hero of Islam. And instead you're like, I will be the one who did the bare minimum for myself and my family. And there's nothing wrong with that, if that's all you can do. I'll give you an example, and hopefully this will illustrate it a lot better. The red phone rings in an accident emergency department. It means that someone's coming in and they're at death's door. And when they come in, if you are a medical student and you say, listen, I'll write the names on the blood bottles and I'll run them up to the lab, everyone will afterwards, they'll like pat you on the back and say, well done, thank you, you helped, right? But if you were the consultant and you did exactly the same thing, you would lose your job. Why? Because the consultant has more potential. The consultant could have saved the life. So running up a blood bottle is just ridiculous. Like that's a dereliction of duty. All I ask you is, if you have health, wealth, education, opportunity, and potential, and with that, you choose to constantly just do the bare minimum, like people who have none of those things, I don't know if that's just. I don't know if you're going to be able to explain that to Allah on the Day of Judgment. You and a beggar from Indonesia turn up to Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what do you do? I looked after my family. I looked after my family. What do you do? I prayed 5 times a day. I prayed 5 times a day. What do you do? I gave whatever I could in zakat. I barely gave any zakat because I didn't have much money. Great. Both of you go to Jannah. Does that make sense? Is that justice? But you had education, you had wealth, you had connections, you had safety, you had security, you had access, you had opportunity. And this guy had none of them. But you both get the same exam and the same mark and you both pass. No, that doesn't make any sense to me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just, He will make His decisions on the Day of Judgment. But all I ask is, you are much greater than you think you are. You have more potential. Reach out.
it's something I often think when traveling. And alhamdulillah, it's a blessing that the Muslim community is growing in wealth and that more of us are able to travel to visit our home countries, to visit other countries. Many of us even will go to a place like Palestine. Many of us will go to Gaza when there's a chance to open, inshallah. And we will see the people that suffer there, and we will mourn for them, and we will cry for them, and we will go back home and we'll donate to them. Yet we don't have the understanding or internal realization that if anyone is going to help them, it has to be those people who have been given the resources and opportunity. And it's, I mean, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
I agree with you. We go there as tourists and we give a few pounds and we think that's the answer. It's like, I don't think that's the answer. I think they're looking for something more than your handouts. And you have the opportunity to do that here. You do have the opportunity.
And it's remarkable, like during various periods of advocacy work, and having spoken with so many people in Gaza over the last year or so, the fact that people actually say to us, it means a lot when you are taking action. It means a lot when you are organizing. It means a lot that someone's created a group called Lawyers for Palestine and is now going out and defending us. You would think that these people who are under the conditions of, sorry to say, hell on earth, would find our tiny efforts useless, yet they clearly see a value in us organizing. Yet we who have the opportunity here don't quite see the value ourselves. We complain that zakat and that charity is too short term, but we don't go and help the NZF. We complain that Islamophobia is an issue, but we don't volunteer for an organization combating Islamophobia. So it's this kind of passivity and lack of awareness.
As a community, unfortunately, we're suffering from a bit of analysis paralysis. So the number of people complaining about Islamophobia, or is this much? I don't know if people actually doing something. Is this much? We suffer with a lot of negative self-talk. It can't be done. It's too much. Everyone is useless. So unless you achieve, I've seen this with one of the recent projects that we were working on. Unless you achieve 100%, you are absolutely slaughtered. And people would ask me when we were doing this work around the election time, they would say, you must have had a lot of right-wing abuse. And I said, it's not right-wing abuse that worried me. It's the abuse we got from the Muslim community. Because the emails would start off, no salam, no kalam. It would be like, you Zionist pig. Right?
Wow. Seriously.
We would get death threats from the Muslim community. They didn't know us. It's just complete misunderstanding, or because they said you should vote for this one and we were saying you should vote for that one. It was endgame. So we've lost a little bit of mercy between each other. We've definitely got a lot of this negative self-talk going on, and we are there's a lot. I have the saying, we need less halaqas and more harakas, right? Less sitting around talking and more movement.
I mean, one thing you said is that stuck with me is that people aren't looking for a companion in the shipwreck. They're looking for a lighthouse on the shore. And in many ways, MCB is trying to provide a lighthouse on the shore, something that unifies us. So I want to bring it to another area, which is that the MCB, and even particularly yourself, has come under criticism for potentially being positioned as an organization, or being positioned generally as something that says, we're Muslims and Britain's there. And we need to look after Muslims, and we need to look after Muslims here and abroad, and Britain needs to, they're a separate entity. Our identity comes first.
Enough to admit when we're making mistakes, saying things can be better. But we almost kind of get into this kind of mindset where we are always on the defensive. And when we're not on the defensive, you see amazing things. I'll give you an example. So one of the projects that the British Islamic Medical Association does is Lifesavers, teaching CPR in mosques all across the country for free on the same day. And they teach non-Muslims as well. And during the Southport riots, I heard, I don't know how accurate this, but this is why I heard that there was like a group of people who came to attack a mosque, and there was an elderly lady outside who said, you can't touch this mosque. And they asked, why? And she said, because I learned CPR on this mosque. 2 weeks later, my husband had a cardiac arrest. And I saved his life. And if it wasn't for this mosque, I wouldn't have learned that. Now, it shouldn't be, I'm not trying to say that, look, we need to provide value to every single person. Otherwise, you could break our places of worship. That's not what I'm saying. But, even if it's apocryphal, even if the story is not true, but the point is that we're here, we can engage with the wider community in a positive way. And it's not always tea and samosa and learn Islam, because that becomes very superficial. There was a time and space for that 20 years ago, but now we need to rethink how we're going to engage with them. We need to start thinking movies. We need to start thinking, TV series. We need to start thinking how we're going to deal with cost of living crisis, and how we're going to deal with, cleaning up the streets and knife crime, because all of this makes us part of the community.
Yeah, and I think there is, if I get somewhat theoretical here. I think sometimes what can happen is that the online sphere is dominated by intellectual leaning people, and that creates this prism or a false perception of reality. Now, one example, for example, is that newspapers and online media will highlight the negative elements of what happens, whether it's terrorism, whether it's child sex grooming gangs, as they like to call it, or child sexual exploitation gangs, which is obviously something that 100% of Muslims on the street, if you told them about this, they'd be disgusted and appalled by, and as we are. The magnifying glass on the negative can make everyone think that the negative is all negative. And that same magnifying glass doesn't ever seem to be put on the positive. But what is actually the case is we see many amazing initiatives like the one you mentioned, like Lifesavers. And actually, the vast majority of British Muslims care about the same issues that other people care about. Housing. We feel the same pain. Actually, we probably feel it to a slightly greater extent because the British Muslim community, there are large sections which are still economically working their way up.
Exactly.
The food, the cost of food increasing, the cost of living increasing, as well as many other issues that affect people on a day-to-day basis.
And we are working on that because there's so many mosques that do food banks and soup kitchens and all of these kind of things. But again, I'll tell you a story. One of my friends called me and he said something really strange happened. I said, what happened? So they were doing a charity not netball tournament, a dodgeball tournament. And when they finished, the owner of the venue, she said, what a nice religion you guys have. And I said, why is that strange? And he said, why did she say religion? Because shouldn't she have said, what nice people you are? And I said, because I'll explain to you why that happened. People operate in stereotypes. That's how people understand things, right? If you guys came as individuals and did your individual thing, she would say, you're a nice person. And everyone knows a nice Muslim, right? But no one likes Islam, right? Because you're an outlier. No, Abdul is lovely. He's my neighbor. He's great. We watch the football together, etc. But I hate Islam. I hate Muslims. Why? Because the stereotype we've built is different and the individual is different. But because you guys went to the dodgeball tournament, you prayed together, you were polite, you cleaned up after yourselves, you did all this kind of stuff. And she saw that you were all of different ethnicities, different groups. And she was like, the only thing that's combining all these people together is their faith. So what a nice religion you have. Just like the stereotype of Japanese people is what? That they're very organized, very clean, very efficient. If you met a slovenly, disorganized Japanese person, you would think, I've met the only disorganized Japanese person in the world. Because your stereotype of them is that they're like that. The stereotype of us is that we're aggressive or that we're trying to be separate. Partly it's not even our fault because women wear hijab, men have beards, we wear thobe. We stick out like a sore thumb, right? But that's not our fault. So we are easier to identify, like a lot of times Sikhs are, unfortunately, because they wear turbans. So they're very easy targets for a lot of people. So you always think there are more Sikhs than there actually are because you just see that they stick out. We stick out too. And then halal restaurants stick out, and then they're like, "Oh, Muslims are taking over."
I don't think people mind the restaurants sticking out.
They mind the halal part. They're like, so it builds this atmosphere, like, oh, and we tend to congregate in major cities. So if you go to Berlin, you go to Oslo, right? Large Muslim populations, and they're in the city, and they're in the city center, and they're very conspicuous. And people start saying, Muslims are everywhere, right? I'm not saying that we should make ourselves less conspicuous, but we should work towards bridging that divide because that divide becomes a little bit bigger. And people are scared. And you think, how can they be scared of us? We're the minority, but they're scared. They're like, you guys are taking over. So we need to work and bridge that divide. And we need to do that online, like I said, through media, through the arts, through programs at an individual level, at a social level, so that the stereotype of Muslim changes. The stereotype should be Muslims. They saved our economy. Muslims, they're growing the country. Muslims, yeah. I'd love to live in a Muslim area because I'm gonna get great schooling. It's gonna be completely clean, no drugs, excellent health, all of this good food. But right now, the stereotype isn't that, is it?
So let's talk politics, because we often end up talking politics on Vonc. What is the MCB's political positioning? Do you guys support a particular party or government, or?
The MCB needs to be politically neutral, and that strategically makes sense because otherwise, if we align ourselves with one party, then when that party's out of power, our community is in trouble, right? So we need to be politically neutral. That doesn't mean the community needs to be politically neutral. Community makes decisions from election to election, but the umbrella body needs to be neutral. What we do want to do is to empower the community politically. So we want to make sure we're all registered. We want to make sure that they're able to vote and they know the issues, but the actual decisions is up to the community.
We saw in the last election that the Muslim community mobilized en masse around Gaza, and it became a central issue, the ceasefire vote and human rights and whatnot. And to be honest, the community has received a lot of backlash. We've seen Kemi Badenoch make targeted comments towards the Muslim community, which I've actually had people in the Conservative Party come on here and say were ill-advised and harmful and divisive rhetoric. So what would you say about that approach taken by the community last election, which was to mobilize around a particular issue?
But that's politics, right? Everyone does that. I mean, people did that around Brexit, and people do that around the NHS. So not to mobilize around a particular issue is insane. I don't even know what else you would mobilize around. What, like mobilize around the party color, or whether your uncle happens to be part of it? Like, you have to mobilize around an issue. What annoys them is the Muslim community mobilized because we're supposed to never mobilize, and annoys them is that we mobilize around an issue like Gaza because we're supposed to just shut up and take genocide at face value. But we're not going to do that.
And many people feel disengaged from political engagement in general. We still saw that now, having looked at some of the marked registers, that while the Muslim community did mobilize, and there were a lot of incredibly impactful results, that voter turnout was still below the national average. So when it comes to engaging in democracy, the Muslim community is unfortunately still facing some challenges. And while we are trying to mature, we are still facing challenges. So what do you dare to say to the everyday Muslim who says, what's the point? Politics is rigged. Politics is fixed. It's not for me.
What's the point of doing anything then? Life is fixed. You're not going to become a billionaire. You're not going to become a millionaire. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already told you what your risk is going to be. So what's the point of working? What's the point of doing anything? What's the point of getting married? She's going to die anyway. What's the point of, what's the point of doing anything? Like, it's that mentality. I honestly, people want an intellectual answer. I'm just going to throw their stupidity back in their faces, right? What's the point of getting involved in politics? It's like, I think we're moved beyond that. Guys, there is a point. It's evident. You can Google it or chat GPT it if you want to find out, but don't waste everyone's time having a discussion that is had 1,000 times and 1,000 videos and 1,000 mosques on 1,000 platforms. Don't waste everyone's time. If you don't want to get involved because you're too lazy to do it, or because you have a principled stance, right? Because I want to make this point very clear. Some people think it's wrong. And I'm not here to debate the fiqh of it. I'm not a faqih. If there's a legitimate difference of opinion, if you think that in your view, you've thought about it, you think I won't get involved, then that's your opinion. I disagree with it, but that's your opinion, right? But don't come to me with flippancy and just say there's no point because nothing changes anyway. Because nothing will change, right? There's that Michael Jordan's quote: "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." So keep not taking the shot, and you will keep missing, and you will never be Michael.
Yeah, I think people need to understand that politics happens whether you engage or not, and people make decisions whether you talk to them or not. And recently I heard from a friend in Westminster that when it comes to the Palestinian issue, or generally Muslim issues that the Muslim community are vocal about, there isn't really anyone around to advise MPs. There is always a briefing to talk about the other side, or the side that is seen as more divisive. There's always 10 briefings, and when you read the briefings, they're pretty convincing, but there is no paper from, quote unquote, our side, or from a more healing side that presents the other side. And that represents the fact that we aren't engaged enough as a community to see the impact, but other people are doing it, which means it's happening. And it could be said across many silos of society. So another area that, people are, again, curious about is that as a Muslim community, one thing we're amazing at is giving to charity. We give lots and lots, and we are able to sacrifice from our wallets to no end to those things that move our heartstrings. And many of our guests have come on previously, and they've said that it's an amazing thing that we have this generosity, which is, I think, 4 times above the national average for an extremely economically disadvantaged community. It's impressive. Would you say that charity is always given in the most strategic way and in a way that produces long-term results?
No, it can always improve. And I bet what every one of the previous guests has said, that we need to invest more locally, and we need to, I would agree with that. I would say that unfortunately in a large part for the large part of the Muslim community, they don't have the trust of those local organizations. They just feel like, I don't know if this is well liked, the most spiritually organized, the most religious, with the best infrastructure, not just for ourselves, but for the entire country. And that sounds like a long way away from where we are right now, but at least we have a vision now where we didn't have one before. And when people say, what do you hope to achieve? I was like, we've already achieved it. We've already achieved it. That was what we wanted to achieve. Putting on the table a goal, a vision for the Muslim community that is proactive, positive, and ambitious. 25 years feels like too short a time to achieve all this, but others have done it in a much shorter time. The Prophet ﷺ conquered the whole of Arabia in 10 years, right? This is possible if we work together, if we unite. And this is when we start giving that kind of proactive vision, you will see people will come together. People will invest in it. People will give their time, their energy, and their money to it. But I just think we haven't articulated that vision strongly enough. I don't think it's been articulated before, and now it needs to be articulated strongly. And then people will be emotionally invested, and when they're emotionally invested, they will fund it. They will throw money at it, inshallah, like they throw money at things they are already emotionally invested in far away. And I say this, like with full humility, that this isn't my vision. Like, this is something that we've been speaking to a lot of people about, but this is the vision for the Muslim community, and we can help build it, right? The destination is clear, but how do we want to get there? There's a saying of the Prophet ﷺ that be in this world as if you're a traveler. Now, the way the majority of people think of that is that you're only here in transit, and you're going through to somewhere else, and that's definitely one way of looking at it. But you could be a traveler with 1,000 suitcases, right? And you could be a traveler who travels light. So what's the one thing that every traveler has in common?
Yeah.
Something else. A destination. If you don't have a destination, you're not a traveler, you're a wanderer, right? Every traveler, whether they travel light or travel heavy, no matter whether they go by airplane or whether they walk, they have a destination in common. As a community, we have no destination. We have no goal. We've been wandering in the wilderness. Now we have a destination and a goal. And if we have that, people will invest, inshallah.
And I think something that is difficult for people to swallow, and even myself as someone who studied economics at uni, who wrote a dissertation on the need for strategic charity renovation, I still find it hard to invest in institutions. Why? Because sometimes the outcomes are intangible. You donate to Sudan, you donate to Gaza, I'm getting 30 meals for my £10, and you donate in an institution, I don't know what I'm paying for. That's the feeling I get. But I also know logically that we have to have a bit of belief. We have to have a bit of vision. And vision means seeing something that's not already there.
You don't see the 30 meals, do you? You don't know.
Actually,
nobody sent you the picture, right?
It's true, yeah.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's not a logical argument. We need people to understand this on an emotional level. And once we change that mindset of what we need to do, those who are asking for that funding, that how we need to approach them, we need them to believe in unity and not ask stupid questions like, why do we need unity, right? And we need to make them willing to sacrifice for that unity. They will do it, inshallah. But you don't hate unity, you hate the way it's been sold to you so far. Now let's sell it well, inshallah.
And we've had a lot of, I guess, venting our frustrations today. But truthfully, I know both you and I are optimists about what's to come and even the momentum that we've seen so far from the MCB. You've been there for over a month now. Could you tell us what are some of the wins you've seen so far, just in the short time that's kicked off?
So we're trying to change the vision, or re-articulate the vision, maybe not change the vision. We're trying to change the team. We're trying to change the culture. And the small changes, and these are like signs of life, right? We've about 50 or 60 people who joined the team. And out of those 60 people, only 3 were part of MCB before. So you have all these new people, young professionals who've done really well in 100 different places. And they're like, you know what? I believe in that vision. I'm here. I'm going to give my time. I'm going to give my energy. For me, that's amazing when you start seeing people say, you know what? I believe in this. Another is our ability to articulate that vision. If you rip up my speech, this is my speech. I was like, this is unity. When you talk about it, when you see it, you know that it exists. And you're like, just like that, we've all come together. That's how it works, inshallah. We will come together. And I've seen hope in people's eyes, and I think we can grow that, inshallah.
What's this new? You guys created an A&E department. What is that?
It's just an example of what we can do differently, thinking differently. So when I spoke to previous Secretary Generals, asking their advice, they said 90 to 95% of my time was dealt being reactive. I never got a chance to do anything proactive or to fix medium or long-term problems because there was always something else coming on and I had to just jump on that. The whole organization had to jump on that. So I said, well, we don't do that in hospital because in hospital we have an A&E department. They're reacting so that the rest of us can be proactive or can deal with the medium or long-term issues. So we need an A&E department. And we set up an A&E department here where we said, right, you're going to react for us. You're full of like nutters and all-rounders who are ready to go at 3 o'clock in the morning. If something happens, you deal with it, you triage it, and the rest of us continue with what we're supposed to do. So it's just an example of being agile and thinking outside the box. It's not the same old, same old. We had a department. I appointed one brother as head of a department on Friday. And his first meeting on Saturday, he called me in and he said, we just had a meeting and we feel like we don't need to exist. We think it's better if we're joining with another department. And within seconds, we said, if everyone was happy, we said, right, this department is closed, join with another department. That level of agility is not normal to most Muslim organizations. Sometimes an email can take a month to get sent, right? And we're closing departments in 12 hours. And the feeling like, you know what, my department doesn't have to exist. It's the work that needs to get done. So all of these are signs of life that I think we should hold on to, and inshallah we'll grow.
And I think we've seen in the Muslim community loads of kind of stagnant bureaucratic organizations that have been around for time. And then we've seen in the last decade or so this rise of awesome startups that are really dynamic. They feel like Silicon Valley with Iman. And I think with MCB, as you said, you guys have grown a team of 50 to 60 people. And a lot of them have been coming from that startup kind of world and bringing in that culture, the culture of dynamism, action, and results. So as you said, it's not been a long time. And I think within the first few weeks of MCB, you've managed to build, alhamdulillah, a really big team. And I think you guys also did something with knife crime very early on.
Yeah, so the A&E team took that on. There was a few stabbings, quite a lot of them involved Muslims, either as the victim or the perpetrator. So we said, look, we should do something about this. This is an issue that affects everyone. Yeah.
Just by uniting and connecting mosques, immediately there's a network effect where now 30 mosques could potentially be setting up bins in communities where stabbings happen often and lives get saved. And it's this idea that you don't need like a bunch of documents and papers to make change happen straight away.
Remove friction, get going, get started. Because now from that, what the A&E team is developing is like a one-page guideline, which they can send to all mosques and just say, if you're interested, this is how much it costs. This is where you can get it from. This is who you can speak to. This is everything. It's your one-stop shop. I mean, I have a policy in MCB, like no document should be more than one page. And if it is, I'll just delete it. I won't read past the first page. So, but yeah, that's the idea. It's like, let's be agile. Let's be quick. Let's get things done, inshallah. Let's pivot and learn quickly. And like you said, fail many times, but never ever let ourselves just be knocked out. We'll always keep getting back up again, inshallah.
And for young people who are now leaving university or in university or at school and they're thinking, I want to make a difference in society, maybe even I went to the protest for Gaza, or I went to do this and this and I didn't see the impact I wanted to see. What's your message for them?
My message is get involved. It doesn't have to be MCB. You can get involved anywhere, but get involved, because when you get involved, you will start making a difference. But unite. Get involved with a group of people. It's really difficult because you have to work outside your comfort zone, right? But growth is in the discomfort zone, right? That's where you grow. That's where you learn. That's where your friendships are going to be made. That's where you go from being someone who's got like 2 or 3 friends that you hang out with all the time, and then you don't ever get to meet them because they're married and you're married and your kids and they've got kids, and then he moves to a different part of to having hundreds of friends all across the world because you're bonded by something. The Prophet ﷺ's companions were not his friends, they were his companions because they were on the same journey together. So it's a different life. All I'd say is, get involved, whatever it is in whichever project. Don't let the negatives or the barriers stop you. Be like water. If you're like ice, everything, you're hard, you're inflexible, you're cold, nothing can get past you. And if you're like vapor, then you're all over the place, just doing random bits and pieces, and no one can actually, work out what exactly you are or what you stand for. But if you're like water, you fill whatever container you're in, and you flow around every obstacle to get to your destination. So be like water, join up with a different organization, get involved, add value. Of course, MCB is already there, inshallah, but there are hundreds of other organizations that are really useful to get.
And just to be clear, oh sure, there's a if you go into the I think we've got to wrap it up in the next two more questions probably. And then in the kitchen, I know the time's flown by. Oh wow.
3, 2, 1, and
And for people volunteering, it's not just going to be giving out leaflets and walking around with a bucket, is it? It's fun work, it's challenging work, is it?
We want to make it fun. There's 101 things you could do. We want a data team, right? That's analyzing, crunching the numbers and data from all over the place, but turning that into actionable evidence base that we can use to do projects. And not just for us, for the rest of the Muslim community as well. We want data for mosques or data for youth groups. We want a team that's focused on specific projects in specific areas. We want to regionalize MCB so that you've got Muslim Council of London, Muslim Council of Midlands, Muslim Council of the North, and so on and so forth. So, pretty much for whatever skill you have, there's a place for you here, but also in other organizations as well. So take your pick, but just get involved.
So it's basically kind of a bunch of smart and experienced people coming together with young and passionate people to execute really cool projects to solve problems for the Muslim community in Britain. Okay, fantastic. And you're known around word on the street is you're a bit of a resident history expert. Are there any examples from history that you feel inspired by when it comes to building the MCB and what it could be for the future?
So this is a bit nerdy, but there was this guy called Nizam al-Mulk. Have you heard of him? He is my personal hero, right? Because for those of you who haven't heard of him, the Abbasid Empire was basically crumbling. It was just huge. So at the peripheries, people were setting up little warlords and kingdoms themselves. And there was a rebellion inside, and it was just all over the place. The Seljuks, which is like a Turkish tribe, came and liberated the Abbasids from the people who were controlling them. And this guy, Nizam al-Mulk, was their prime minister. So they were warriors, and warriors do what warriors do. They come, they take over, but they don't build. This guy built an infrastructure. He came up with a system of how to keep the peripheries in check, how to make the regions loyal. He came up with a system at which he thought through multiple steps in advance, how to educate the Muslim community. So this guy started madrasas called the Nizamiya, which were like universities at the time. So he's the direct forefather, right? Not like biological, but he's like the intellectual forefather of Imam al-Ghazali and Salah ad-Din, right? So the intellectual and physical revival of Muslim Ummah starts with this guy who comes up with this amazing strategy on how to unite Muslims. He wrote a book, which is very difficult to get hold of. It's called Advice for Princes, where he talks about system of government, how you should rule, and it's just so full of wisdom. So I've seen examples through history where people have transformed societies by uniting them, giving them a clear vision, giving them a clear strategy, and communities come together, and how sometimes you don't live to see the difference, and he didn't live to see the difference, but it does come sooner rather than later. And then you have other examples like how Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew transformed it from a fishing village, that was not very rich into like literally a first world country, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot that you can use in history. Why? My generation built the mosques. We built 3,000 of them. But your generation, the previous generation, did a fantastic job building it and theorizing it and building the foundations. And our job now is to build on those foundations and take it to the next level. And if you believe that that's possible, if you're positive about the future, inshallah, if you believe that our better, brighter days are ahead of us rather than behind us, then come join us.
Thank you for being on. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Smashed it, man.
No, you're very kind.